Born in 1860 in the coastal tourist town of Ostend, Belgium, James Ensor explored the past, the present, and the peculiar through his many works across mediums including prints, etchings, and of course paintings. And while I do love this self-portrait of him in a very pretty hat, and no, this is not Photoshop, this is not the work we will be discussing today, but I promise it will be just as fun. Ah, there we go. Much better. This 1889 oil-on-canvas painting, Skeletons Warming Themselves, left a lasting impression on me when I first saw it in person at the Kimball Art Museum. Immediately drawn to it for its macabre depiction of some spooky, scary skeletons, I began to soon recognize its diverse history and influences that I would like to discuss today. Housed in the painting's foreground are a number of objects, including a painter's palette, a violin, and a lamp, along with some discarded skulls, which is remarkably haunting in a painting with fully articulated skeletons. These items placed together in their own mini composition invokes the vanitas still life tradition popular among Dutch and Flemish artists of the 17th century. Representing visual arts, music, and literature respectively, vanitas serve to ultimately remind the viewer that all things, even our luxuries and passions, will all eventually be lost to the passage of time and the inevitability of death, as accentuated by the skulls. Fun! Strongly identifying with his native Belgium as a Northern European, Ensor takes inspiration from the history and artistic conventions of the North. Within the larger work of Skeletons Warming Themselves, these objects serve to similarly remind us of the inevitability of death. You know, as if the skeletons weren't enough, as well as perhaps reflect on the fading patronage of the arts in a newly emancipated and economically unstable Belgium. Now on to what we all came here for. The skeletons. While the skeletons may at first seem related to the vanitas aspect of the work, the tradition of fully articulated living-ish skeletons can be linked to the Dance of Death archetypal images dating back to the medieval period. Depicted across many countries in Europe, these numerous images of undead skeletons can be equally horrific and hilarious, or perhaps a mixture of both, as seen in, and please forgive me, I do not speak German, Michael Wurmgert's Dance of Death. Ensor makes use of the more playful aspect of skeletons by dressing them up in colorful outfits, making them seem less like objects of discomfort and more identifiable as people with their individuality and sense of style. Ensor himself was quite familiar with skeletons, as some stories say that the carnage of a 17th century siege of Ostend was known to wash up on the beaches when Ensor was a child. That may or may not be legend, but what we do know is that as an adult, Ensor was interested in the excavations of Ostend and even took home a skull as seen in this photo of him in his studio. What a guy. While humorous, these skeletons can have an equally sad interpretation as well. Written faintly on a blue box in the painting's lower center is an inscription reading "Pas de feu, en trouverez-vous demain" in French, or "No fire, will you find any tomorrow" in English. Though it can be humorous to imagine two skeletons discussing something so mortal as the need for warmth, the inscription can additionally speak to the desperation and uncertainty of poverty, as well as the deadly consequences of extreme poverty. While you might be thinking, hey, aren't those interpretations vastly different and contradict one another? And you wouldn't be wrong. But that is perhaps what I love most about the work of James Ensor, his ability to draw in viewers with the promise of frivolity before confronting us with more difficult questions, in a composition that seemingly captures both moods perfectly. Finally, let's talk about the paint of the painting. Created during Ensor's Impressionism period, Skeletons Warming Themselves ultimately rejects the naturalism of the artist's beloved 17th century Dutch and Flemish paintings, as well as the clean, licked surfaces favored by the French Royal Academy. Instead, the artist opts for the loose, painterly brushstrokes that are at the very heart of Impressionism. We can see them in the hazy skeleton faces, as well as the wrinkly coat on the floor. Ensor additionally took interest in experimenting with light and color, another hallmark of Impressionism. This is most visible in the white wooden floors accented with purples, light reds, and blues to provide a sense of depth rather than the traditional use of variations of tone. This blending of older traditions and motifs with the bold, new techniques of artists of his own time demonstrate Ensor's ability to engage with past and present to create something wholly new and all his own in a work that is decidedly modern. Exploring the work of James Ensor has reminded me of the transcendence of art versus the escapism I so often seek in it. Despite being born 161 years ago and never living beyond his hometown, his exploration of existential dread combined with his own weird sense of humor and layers of irony and satire still resonates and feels applicable in our own time's anxieties and means of representing it. The separation of past and present can so often idealize the artist as masters or visionaries, but to really examine them is to know that they were just people, like you and me. Through the bony features of his many skeletal figures, we might just see ourselves. So thanks, James Ensor, for making it feel all a little less lonely. Maybe we'll meet you someday when we all inevitably look like this.